Of our span here for Q&A. Brenna has been an awesome colleague to work with. Her fierce desire to keep fossil fuels in the ground is inspiring. California, which is one of the fourth largest economies in the world, has recently signed on to the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty by Brenna being one of the head leads in organizing that and demonstrating that this is needed on a global scale. So my name's Thomas Joseph. I grew up not too far from here. I am enrolled with the Hoopa Valley Tribe, which is located in the Six Rivers National Forest in Northern California. We are forest-dwelling indigenous peoples. Our land has always been a rainforest that has changed dramatically due to deforestation of the redwoods and deforestation of the inland empires as well, forest empires. I'm also Shoshone Paiute. My father is an enrolled member of the Lone Pine Shoshone Paiute tribe, what we call Paiute, the land of flowing water. It's known today as Owen Valley, which has been stripped of its water to supply Los Angeles with the ability to be the large city that it is. I grew up on the Clearwater River, which is a contributory to the Columbia River here, on the lands of the Nez Perce. I grew up there. I have a lot of family and friends that are Minipu, and it was a good teaching instructions that they've taught me to also understand their connection to place and the importance of protecting our environment and our lands and our waters, and honoring the reciprocal relationship indigenous peoples have always had with their land. Growing up, being connected to that land, which was not a land of my own, gave me a foundation of understanding that we have that ability. We have that ability to connect to place and how important place really is, and the responsibility that we all carry as indigenous and non-indigenous to protect the place, to honor the sacred, and to understand that the importance of that reciprocal relationship that we have with our Mother Earth. And that is one of the reasons why I'm so inspired to be here with you all today, because this is a room full of people that are dedicated to protecting the sacred, that have dedicated. I have been on the front lines with many of you. I was very active in the LNG, stopping the LNG pipeline in Southern Oregon. A hard work of everybody in this room and beyond contributing to that. And so I see you. I know where your hearts lie. I understand that you too now have ancestors buried in these lands. And with that comes a responsibility to be accountable to the lands that you walk on, to the water that you drink, and to the air that you breathe. And to come into Portland and witness the drive, the ambition to call out this dark force for what it is. It's a lie. We understand that colonialism is a root cause of climate change. Science will tell you it's fossil fuel, and it's right. Fossil fuel is creating climate change. But it's based on the foundations of colonialism. It's based on the foundations of white supremacy. It's based on the foundation of capitalism. And so if we are to address climate change at scale, those foundations need to be challenged. And it's not going to take market mechanisms. It's not going to take capitalism that we see that's going on inside the halls of where our research assistants were, or in the halls of the UN. That's just a further continuation of colonialism. Yes. And it's led primarily by white men. I mean, who was there yesterday morning when they had the all women's breakfast? It was like 99% white males walking into that space. And that's the truth. That's what it is, you know. And I've been working with so living in the forested land of my ancestral people in Hoopa and in the Nez Perce lands. But living in Hoopa, I was working for our fiscal department for our tribe, and I seen our first carbon market being introduced to our community, and I was kind of shocked I was like, that's a lot of money. You know, it was, I think at the time, $38 million. And I was like, that's a lot of money, and it kind of sounds too good to be true. And growing up in a matriarch society, in a matriarch household, I'm one of 10 children. I have 5 sisters, so it's a little intense. You know, you take this information and you speak to the matriarchs of the community, and they told me if it's too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true. So dig into it. My brother is in linguistics for our tribe, trying to revitalize our language. We have a few fluent speakers, but he's doing a great job of bringing that language back. And so I was asking him, how would you translate this? And he's all, translate what? How do you translate the sequestration of carbon for the benefit of a corporation or an individual? How does that, and he's like, you can do a direct translation, which would probably be about 2 to 3 pages. But in reality, it doesn't translate. Because our indigenous values and our indigenous teachings tell us that you can't commodify your Mother Earth in this manner. That you can't take something for the benefit of one, that you can't take something to offset or to harm another people or another community for your personal gain. And so that really hit me, because knowing the history of American Indians and the policies of the US government, talking directly about the Indian Relocation Act, is where they came into our communities and they stripped our communities of our teachers, of our doctors, of our medicine leaders, of our children, and they put them in these cities. And when they were relocated into these cities, they were relocated into the impoverished parts of the communities, where you find cement factories, oil refineries, plastic factories, and that those communities are now experiencing high levels of asthma, cancer, low life expectancy. That's where our indigenous people live if they're not living on their ancestral lands. That's where they've been relocated to. And so now you have a corporation that is asking us to offset their pollution so that they can continue business as usual. That they can continue to emit their emissions and continue to cause harm to our tribal members that are near their factories. And so our people wouldn't stand for it. Our people said, no, we're not going to allow that to happen. We're not going to allow our trees to offset you so you can continue to harm not only our indigenous community that lives near refineries, but other people of color as well. This is not the first time that we've endured trickery, that we've endured what I call trickets, or, you know, back in the day when they were trying to take our land, they would think, oh, here you can have this, and it's just a little something shiny, or like, oh, what a fool, he thinks he's gonna own the land, he's gonna give you this shiny item, you know? And they're thinking, oh, what a fool, I'm gonna give him this shiny item and I'm gonna own all this land. Because that was a conflict of understanding, because we didn't think that one can own the land. And this is a similar scenario. And we see as carbon markets as a continuation of that. It's a similar scenario. So the indigenous people in the room, I focus on taking a lot of these carbon market trainings to indigenous peoples because they're the ones that are being targeted. It's the indigenous lands, like my colleague was saying, 80% of the world's biodiversity is in the tenure of indigenous peoples, yet they're a small percentage. And so for the global north to continue their reign as the global north, as these empires, they need access to those biodiversities. And so they're targeting those indigenous communities with projects like forest offsets, nature-based solutions, 30 by 30, because they need to access that unceded indigenous lands. And if you look into Canada, or actually anywhere else in the globe, even here in the United States, they will take that land by all means necessary, even by military might, as we see with the Wet'suwet'en, as we see with what's going on in Mexico with the indigenous people and the expansion of their railway system, as we see in Brazil and Peru, and Ecuador, in South and Central America when we're talking about the Amazon. That these forest-dwelling indigenous peoples are being removed from their land because of a contract they signed for carbon and forest offset projects. And it's tied to a global market. We can see that the commencement of the Kyoto Agreement, which was the foundation for the Paris Climate Agreement, where the world needs to reduce emissions so that we don't reach 1.5 or beyond. You hear EJ communities throughout the globe, 1.5, stay alive. 1.5 is devastational to indigenous peoples. It is not low enough. We will still experience grave harm from climate change at 1.5. Anything beyond is genocidal. And anything beyond that is genocidal for all of us, for all of humanity. This is a real threat. We are experiencing it now. We have seen it in our past. You have lived on these lands long enough to understand that it is a completely different world than what you grew up in. That these lands have changed dramatically. And they will continue to change. Where do you align with your relationship to place? With your responsibility to the sacred? We heard yesterday from our grandmothers that it's the indigenous peoples that are putting their literally life on the line to protect what is left. These indigenous peoples understand that reciprocal relationship. This is not their first go around with colonialism. This is not their first go around with losing all of what they have for the defense of protecting the sacred. The sacredness of their lands, of their air, of their water, and of their families. So, if we look at the United Nations as a mechanism to address climate change, to protect us from 1.5, we need to look at their solutions, or their so-called solutions. What are they doing to reduce emissions at source? Nothing. What are they doing to create a smokescreen or a promise or a sense of hope to civil society to make them think that they're addressing climate change? They're creating market mechanisms. They're creating offset projects. They're creating a vast array of false solutions that we can find highly funded through the so-called climate bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is allocating billions of dollars to capture carbon out of the air with CCS, carbon capture and storage, or even with DACS, direct air capture. So these are the methods that they're using. And we wonder, like, oh, that's awesome. Civil society thinks that's great. Yes, let's capture that carbon. But in fact, they're not capturing the carbon. None of those techno fixes are reaching their goals or standards. They know that. They don't need to. All they need to do is create a false hope and continue business as usual. Continue to reap the money that is being poured into these false solutions by your tax dollars. Continue to reap the money of continuing business as usual, as continuing to drill, continuing to pump oil, continuing to burn oil. If you look at carbon capture and storage, it's a little device they're going to put on top of the refinery to capture the carbon. The carbon is harmful to our Mother Earth, but what about all of the other materials and poisons that are being released into the air that's not carbon? That's causing that asthma. That's causing that harm to those BIPOC communities. That's not being captured. Yes, that now they can increase their burning of fossil fuel because they're so-called capturing it. What do they do after they capture it? They put it in the pipelines, they liquefy it, and they send it back out to fracking zones so they can pump for more oil. These are the solutions our governments are coming up with. This is the solution to keeping us at 1.5 stay alive. So if we want to create real solutions to climate change, if we want to make sure that we stay alive, we need to reduce emissions at source. We need to keep fossil fuels in the ground, and we need to end our government's desire to use market mechanisms and capitalism to address climate change. And that's why this is beautiful, because that's exactly what we did to the conference that was being held these last few days. We let them know that we see you and we understand what's going on. Business as usual cannot continue. Business as usual must change, it must adapt. And if it doesn't, then we must think of ways of survival. How are we going to survive through climate change? If we're not going to address it at scale with real solutions, then we need to be able to think, how are we going to feed our families? How are we going to be able to take care of each other? We've seen a picture of that with COVID and how mutual aid flourished through all our communities. And we've seen the weak links in the chain on what needs to be fixed with that mutual aid, what wasn't working, what was working. But the most important thing is you have the ability to come in community with people that have experienced this before. These lands are full of indigenous peoples that have experienced colonialism and capitalism at mass scale and is still experiencing that. You have the ability to come in relationship with people that has also experienced a shift of climate and how their reciprocal relationship with place helped them thrive through that transition of climate. It may have happened thousands of years ago, but those teachings are still very well alive within those communities. So one of the greatest things that you can do is uplift and support the rights of indigenous peoples. Their sovereignty, their right for self-determination, their ability to protect and defend their lands. With that, we can start being able to create more space for climate change. One of my task at hand working for the Indigenous Environmental Network is to talk about carbon markets and false solutions. That's kind of what I do. But the question always arises, what is the climate solution then? If you're saying no to this and no to that and no to this, what are you saying yes to? My colleague Britta spoke to it earlier as an indigenous just transition, but equally important is there something that existed for thousands of years, an indigenous women economy. Indigenous female and femme economy is the solution to climate change. Not only has it worked here on Turtle Island, but it's worked globally. I encourage you to learn more about that. That's not my forte. I talk about false solutions, but just in case somebody wants to ask me what the solution is to climate change, there you go. And so as we prepare to address, people ask us, why are you going to COP? COP is the convening of parties for the United Nations. They created these conventions. There's two of them. There's a COP for climate change, and there's a COP for biodiversity. And so because they witnessed that the biodiversity in the world is depleting, that needs to be addressed. And they also witnessed that the climate also needs to be addressed as well. Thousands of people are pouring into Dubai this coming winter in December, or ending of November, to come together to say, what can we do? What can we continue to do to keep us at 1.5? All of these measures moving forward is market mechanisms, Article 6 of the Paris Climate Accord. That needs to be addressed. And people say, well, why are you going there? And we go there because if you're not at the table, you're being served up. I already spoke to how our indigenous communities are being targeted with these markets. And we need to start implementing grievance mechanisms for the indigenous communities that have signed these contracts. Because these contracts are year-long contracts. And so we need to be able to start creating space for a grievance method that these corporations that are targeting indigenous peoples can be held accountable. And that perhaps some of those contracts can be terminated because of the human rights violations that it is. And I'm not just saying human rights violations like it's a small thing. If you look at the Paris Climate Agreement that was passed 2015. And then you look at the implementation of Article 6, which is not yet fully implemented in 2022. That's a 7-year span. Why do you pass an agreement, a Paris Climate Agreement, but not the whole shebang? How come Article 6 is left out? Article 6 is left out because of the human rights violations that it causes, like RED and RED Plus. These forest offset projects cause human rights violations, and there's not one country that wants to stand up and say, we want human rights violations. They won't say it, but that's what they're doing. And so this constant contention about wanting to look good on a global platform is why Article 6 hasn't been fully implemented yet. But we will see full implementation of Article 6 most likely coming in Dubai, which means here comes the human rights violations. And where do we stand on that? And what communities are we going to defend and protect? I had an elder up here speak to us earlier about the importance of protecting our traditional foods, because we understand when our traditional foods go, we go. They're a market for us. They're not a market, they're a mark, like a check mark. You know, when we see them being depleted and disappearing, just like our salmon, so will we. And I want to let you know, Indigenous peoples are your indicator. When you lose your Indigenous peoples, you're next. So I don't want to take up too much time. I think I forgot to set my timer. But thank you.